Hey, hey. All right. And it looks we are live. All right. Well, hey, hey. Happy Tuesday. And if you're watching me live, let me know by putting a little hello in the comments. Let me know that you're here with me. And if you're watching the replay, let me know by putting hashtag replay in the comments. I love to see who tapped in. But let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Ashley Cuthbertson. I use the pronouns she and her, and I'm so happy that you are joining me either live or watching for my Tuesday night conversations on equity in music education. I've been doing live virtual workshops all kind of throughout the year, and then I know in November for my music teachers, this is a tough month, and so I thought instead of doing a whole workshop in November, instead I would go through the questions that I most commonly get and just do a live every Tuesday. So every Tuesday in November, I've been going live on all the places. So I'm live on Instagram. So Instagram friends, if you're here, let me know. I'm live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and also YouTube. And I'll put the replay up as well. And so it's been really interesting to be able to go back through all these different questions that I've been getting, both from the workshops that I do online, but also from the school district and also the one-on-one coaching clients that I have. To be able to go back through some of these questions, to be able to just kind of casually talk about them. And so if you're here watching me, hey, hello. Please let me know if you have a question that you want me to answer live. Today I'm feeling a little under the weather, a little tired, so I just pulled out 2 questions, so it'll be a little bit shorter of a live. So if you have a question you want me to answer, please make sure you get that in, and I'll make sure that I answer that for you. All right, so let's jump in. So I already introduced myself. I'm Ashley Cuthbertson. I use the pronouns she, her. And I am a music educator based here in the Northern Virginia, DC, Maryland area. And I was in the classroom for 12 years, but now I am a full-time education consultant. I run my own consulting firm that I recently founded, A. Cuthbertson Consulting, and we focus on helping music educators build and maintain high-quality music programs that attract, engage, and retain music students by centering equitable and culturally responsive practices in their curriculum and instruction. So I know that music educators everywhere, because I've had the great privilege of working with folks literally all across our country, but also internationally now. I know that we really want music to be for everyone. And I know that unfortunately, a high quality, culturally responsive, universally designed music program that's accessible to all of our students and our student communities is just not the reality. And it's not because music teachers don't want to, it's because that we just don't have the support, the resources, or the time to be able to really thoughtfully create curriculum and put structures in place in our music programs to be able to really make music be for everyone. So I founded my company to fill this huge need that I know that my colleagues have, to have really sustained and ongoing support. Popping in and doing, PDs and things are helpful. I was just at our conference here in Virginia, and those things are great. But really, as music educators, what we need is sustained supports. And so that's what I do through my consulting company. I work primarily, though, with schools, school districts, and organizations to support their music educators. And so today I have 2 questions that I'm going to answer. And then again, if you're here with me live, please let me know if you have a question that you want me to answer as well, along the lines of how do we ensure equitable and culturally responsive practices and our programs in our music curriculum and instruction. So here's the first one. This first question says, how can I use hip hop and pop music in my lessons? I want to avoid inappropriate content while still using contemporary music. I think this is a very, very common question and wondering that a lot of music educators have, especially when they're thinking about how to make connections with their students, how to make the learning relevant. And I love that this person is asking, I want to be able to use music that I know my students are listening to, but how do I actually make it relevant for them? Or not relevant, but how to make it appropriate for them. So the first thing that I'll say is that we still teach children in our K-12 space. And so it's important that we remember that sometimes the music on the radio, I know that for me, a lot of music that I listen to, I cannot play for my students, not because it doesn't have value, but because I am a grown adult, right? And I taught rather when I was in the classroom students. And so the first thing is, remember, we still teach kids. And regardless of whether our kids are listening to all kinds of things at home or not, it's like that's not actually under our control, but we can control what we play in our classrooms and what we have. So first is we still teach kids. So that means that we need to make sure that the topics of the music are still child appropriate, right? So we want to stay away from things that are adult topics. Again, regardless of whether or not they're listening to it, right? We can control what we have in our classroom. So first of all, we teach kids, make sure it's kid appropriate. And that calls on you to use your best judgment as far as what's going to make sense for your students and more importantly, probably your community as well, right? So depending upon where you are teaching, your students might be more exposed to different types of music, might be exposed to more adult topics, and so you have to just kind of use your best judgment. Like, is this an opportunity to make that connection for my students? Is there going to be a curricular reason why I'm introducing this? Right, we don't want to just introduce stuff just to introduce it. What's the reason why we're putting it there? So, hey, thanks for saying hey. Grupo, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. But thank you for joining me live. So let's consider our students, what we know about them, the community that we're teaching in. It's also important to remember that not all students like hip hop music, not all students like pop music, not all Black and brown kids like hip hop music, right? So think about what's going to be most resonating with your students and what's going to be appropriate for them. So a couple of practical things. So in my own classroom, when I was using kind of my best judgment, like I know we have a lot of clean versions of songs that are available for us to use. I sometimes would do that, although I will say the problem I ran into often when I use clean versions of songs, especially songs that had lots of, just like curse words in the lyrics or things that just I did not want my principal walking in while that song was playing, right? The problem with clean lyrics is that when they're saying they're saying the phrase and then the word happens, but they have changed the word or they've, edited it out or whatever. The problem is if the kids know how that phrase is supposed to go, like the lyrics, they're probably going to say it and not out of malice, but just out of like being a human being, like we're recalling what we know. So they're probably going to say it. So if it's a song where there's a lot of things happening in there where you're not, if your principal could not walk in and you would feel not embarrassed if a child like slipped something out, instead what I actually recommend that music teachers use is instead of using clean lyrics, especially when there's a lot of words and things that might not be appropriate, instead use instrumental tracks instead. And I think since before the pandemic and before there was a lot more oodles of music. I think this person was thinking like K to 5, K 8, like elementary kind of. I think that's the person that where this person was coming from. When we're thinking about like before the pandemic, I remember I had a much harder time finding just instrumental tracks of songs. But since the pandemic and lots more of people putting things on YouTube and making different versions of things, I've had a lot easier time of finding instrumental tracks. I can't remember the last time I was looking for an instrumental track of something and I couldn't find it. So I actually would suggest to you, if you're really looking to use a piece of music that you think is going to connect with your students, but there's maybe not so much the concept, but the words might be a little bit worrisome, right? If your principal is walking in, are you going to feel embarrassed? I would actually suggest you use an instrumental backing track instead of the clean version, because again, if the kids know the words, they are probably going to sing along, right? And words are going to slip out that maybe you don't want them to. And so a way to avoid that is just by using the instrumental version. Now, does that mean the kids are not going to still like sing along or rap along? No, it does not mean that, but it means it's going to be less likely that words are going to be slipping out when your principal comes in, right? And you don't want them to hear that. So if you're thinking about how can we, someone was asking, how can we use hip hop and pop music in our lessons? And specifically, they're asking how to avoid inappropriate content and still use contemporary music. Think about finding instrumental tracks for the music rather than clean. Again, you got to use your best judgment. Sometimes the clean is the easier thing if it's only like a word here or there. Absolutely, if the very topic of the song is just not a kid topic, don't use it anyway, because again, we teach kids K to 12 or oodles of music. I see you asking about K to 5 to K to 8. Let's still think about what's appropriate for young children. So that would be my my recommendation. A couple other things I wrote in my notes here. Oh, so my approach really centers on culturally responsive and equitable approaches pedagogically in music. And so I also wanted to point out that just using hip hop or pop music in your lesson lessons is not actually culturally responsive. Culturally responsive pedagogical practice call on us as teachers to utilize our students' frames of reference. That's the culture that they already have. So frames of reference, how they see the world, pieces of their identity. How are we using those things that they already have in their mind to then bridge into the new content? I kind of think of it like if your body is like a computer. When you get a new computer, you don't have a whole bunch of, or a new cell phone, right? When you get a new cell phone, you may have a couple of apps on it, but you don't have a whole lot of software yet, right? That you add apps and other software as you go along. Well, we're the same way. So when you're born, you're kind of a blank slate, and the apps and things that are downloaded, that's your culture as you go through life, right? So the people that you interact with, the people who raise you, the community that you live in, the experiences that you have, all of that contributes to your frame of reference, and that's what makes up your culture and your identity. So when we think about using hip hop and pop music in the classroom, just using hip hop and pop music, well, that might be something that is part of a frame of reference of our students. The next question is, how are we using that music to like connect to real world context? So like why are you teaching that hip hop piece of music? Like what real world connection does it have? Also, like what is the skill or the concept? Because we still are standards based teachers. I know sometimes folks think cultural responsive teaching is a little woo woo. It's not. We're still focusing on the standards. So just throwing a hip hop piece or a pop piece in there, that's not actually culturally responsive. How are you connecting it to students' current frames of reference, their current cultural filter, their cultural apps, if you will? How are you bridging that into new content? And how are you utilizing the music concepts and skills to get them there, right? So just using a hip hop piece doesn't really encompass all of the different pedagogical moves that we want to ensure as culturally responsive music educators. So I would encourage you to think deeper than that. A good place to go to look for some more information about like what that could look like is on my website. I write a blog most weeks, and I have all kinds of different topics that I write different articles on. And I have a few articles where I talk about the curricular piece and what that could look like. So if you're looking for like, what are some actual like culturally responsive pedagogical moves I can use? My blog has some examples, and there's some that you can download for free to see what that looks like. All right, so I'm gonna head on to the second question. Thank you again. I see a couple of people popping in and out. Thank you for joining me. I've been going live every Tuesday in November, just answering questions and having conversations about equity in our music education space. I am just going to answer one more question tonight. So I see a couple of people popping in and out. If you have a question that you'd like me to answer, make sure you get it in, because I'm going to answer the one other question that I have, and then I'm going to cut it a little bit short. Well, I'm saying it's a little bit short, but I realize I've been talking for a while. So I'm just going to answer one more question for today. So here's the second question I pulled. This question says, how do we implement culturally responsive teaching with younger grades without overwhelming them? That's a great question. Oftentimes, I feel like the examples that we see in social media and other places oftentimes are more geared towards older students. And so again, on my blog, I have a couple of curricular examples that are specifically for younger elementary, because I know this is a big question that music teachers have, and a couple of thoughts that I have about how do we implement culturally responsive music teaching with still our younger students. So again, as I said before, we always want to consider like what's age appropriate for our students, both in the content that we are introducing to them, as well as in the words that we use to describe it. So contrary to what some people would have you believe, young children are very capable of discussing race, right? There's research that shows that children as young as 3 years old are recognizing race in different people, but they're also beginning to recognize like racism, and they're beginning to recognize like some people with certain colors of skin are like, they're getting a complex about it already at like the age of 3. And so while some people would have you think that young children cannot engage in conversations about race, I encourage you to challenge that, because my personal experience is that not only are they very capable of engaging in conversations about race, but they have things to say. And it's important as we consider all parts of culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy that we're not just trying to diversify our repertoire. And if you've been with me for a while, you've heard me say many times, simply diversifying our repertoire is not culturally responsive, because what if you are continuing to teach your repertoire with lots of teacher bias? What if you have not created a learning environment that students want to engage in? What if you are not utilizing the students' current frames of reference to bridge into new content, as I was just saying? So, you could diversify your repertoire. That's great. there's other things that need to happen as well, right? So with our younger students, we want to consider like what's appropriate age wise for them and content wise. And part of being culturally responsive is that we are preparing our students to go out into the world and use the knowledge that they've gained in our classrooms. So how are we helping them to use the musical content and skills and knowledge when they go out in the world, right? I believe that music is not actually our destination in our classrooms, that actually music is just the vehicle that gets us where we want to go, right? I want my students to be well informed, empathetic, compassionate members of our global society. And music just is the medium that I use to get them there, right? So that means that we have to talk about race because racism very much exists in our society. We have to talk about issues of sexism. We have to talk about issues of homophobia and transphobia, all the isms, right? And young students are very capable of being able to engage in those conversations. It's the adults, I find, that have a harder time because adults are older. We have more experience of maybe even negative experiences, whereas children tend to be a little bit more open. So how do we implement cultural touch of teaching with younger grades? Be age appropriate with content and also your phrases. Know your students and also know your community. So if you know that you're teaching in a community that might be more, I mean, I think everywhere is politically charged right now, but if you're teaching in a community that might be more politically charged, and I've talked about this in some other lives, and I have a whole blog post that I wrote about how do you handle pushback from parents and community. So I encourage you to go to my blog and check out that. I think it's called How Do You Handle Pushback or Dealing with Pushback. So know your community. So if you know that your community is a more highly charged place, then you're going to make sure that you are very clear about what your mission and vision is for your music program. And you're going to make that very clear and apparent to folks before you really dig into curriculum stuff. So I always encourage music teachers, because we're not always required to do back to school night things, but I always participated in the back to school nights at my schools. And I was fortunate that I often worked with a partner. And so I would, my partner and I would make sure that we got in front of all of the parents that came to the back to school night. We know not everybody comes, but get in front of all the grade levels and let's be clear about what our music program is about, what we're trying to accomplish, what we're doing. So that later on, we've already started to proactively let our community know like what we're trying to do, right? Like we intend to perform music from a variety of cultures. We intend for students to be able to go out and talk about issues and different topics in relation to the world, right? So front load that for your community, make it clear, make it plain. Because just like how sometimes introducing a brand new thing to students can be very uncomfortable, adults are the same way. A lot of times adults are just afraid. And that's where some of these outbursts that we see come from. So make sure your community, like don't just drop a race bomb on them and you've never talked about race before. Get them ready for that. Be clear about your mission and vision. Be clear about the curriculum that you're engaging in and how what you're doing aligns to that, right? And make it plain, for them, just like you would make it plain for your students. This person also asked, how do we do this without overwhelming our students? So I think it's really important. And if you've been with me for a while, you've heard me say we have to, as music teachers, I know our time is short, but we have to be well informed about the repertoire and other musical materials that we are utilizing in our classroom. That means at the very least, you need to know the who, what, when, where, why, how, and the purpose of the music that you're utilizing. I also take it a step further, and those who work with me through my PD sessions and some of my one-on-one coaching clients, there's a framework that I utilize as far as how do we research the material at a deeper level so that we can use it for these bigger, deeper, more meaningful connections while still performing music, right? And so when we think about particularly music that often gets passed around in our music collections, that this will say something like Mexican folk song and no other information, like that's not good enough, right? So we need to make sure that we've done our due diligence with the repertoire that we are using. And then when we present students, we need to tell those things, right? Like, so it's not just for you as the teacher to have done your research. I mean, it is for you, right? But you also want to make sure that you are also turning it around and giving it to your students in a child appropriate way. So this is why I say for people who want to make the argument that there's nuance to this, right? There are certain composers, musicians, creators, and musical informants for whom I would never feel comfortable talking to my students about them, because in order for me to talk about them, I would have to talk about really traumatic things, right? So I was The episode's not going to come out for a long time, but I was on a good friend of mine, her podcast, Jocelyn Hubbard, her podcast, The Culture Centered Classroom, and we were just recording, but it's not going to be out for a while. And we were just talking about, I forget why R. Kelly came up, but we like briefly touched on it. And R. Kelly has put out some really great music, right? I Believe I Can Fly. Like I've taught that to my elementary students. Here's the problem though. We know that R. Kelly is a highly, like problematic is not even big enough to explain the issues that surround R. Kelly. I would never feel comfortable talking to my students about R. Kelly and the things that he has gotten himself into and done and the harm he has caused, because it's highly traumatic, right? And so I would never feel comfortable talking about that with my students. And so as much as I love the song, I Believe I Can Fly, I would never teach that again to my students. And so one way that we want to make sure that we don't overwhelm kids is that we think about those things, right? So that's great that we love that song, but it would be highly overwhelming and traumatic to talk about R. Kelly as a person, the full person, right? And that doesn't mean that we cancel everybody. I personally have canceled R. Kelly, but there's nuance to it, right? Not every musician or informant or composer that has done something kind of problematic doesn't necessitate that we need to cancel them, but we have to think about the nuance of it, right? Like, is it going to be traumatic and overwhelming for me to talk about the full story of this person to my students, right? Like, what traumas might I be either exposing them to or reopening for students who have already had experienced this kind of trauma? Um, there's nuance to it, right? Like, because I also believe that you're not your worst mistake that you've made. Sometimes there's opportunities for us to talk about musicians and informants and composers who've made bad decisions and have done things to turn it around, right? There's opportunities there for us, but I'm never going to purposely overwhelm or traumatize a child. And so if I can't talk about the fullness of a person, I'm not going to talk about it. The other thing I wanted to say about how do we not overwhelm our younger grades, we've done all of our research, digging deep into the music. We don't need to lecture our kindergartners about a particular song, right? If you're talking for more than like 30 seconds, 45 seconds, you're now lecturing. That's getting to be too long, especially for our younger elementary students. Instead, consider all the information that you've gathered. How can you chunk that information out over a period of time? And here's why I advocate for music educators to move away from just single lessons, single class period teaching, and then going on to something new. And instead, how can you build a unit that centers around a central big idea that you then tease out over many lessons and class periods? Because you can't really get deep connections happening in one 30-minute class period and then you go on to the next topic, right? So instead, I encourage music teachers to think, how can you have a central unit topic and then you have many lessons that support that topic so that you can then have more time to talk about these things, right? So maybe the first day, you're talking about maybe it's a folk song for your first grade class. Maybe the first day, you just show the map of where the song comes from, a little bit of information about the people, the culture, right? And then you move on. Maybe the next day, you revisit the map and the people, the culture, and you share some additional facts. And then the next day, you see where I'm going? And so we don't want to lecture them and overwhelm them with information, but they still need to get the information, right? The research you do is not just for you, it's also so that your students can benefit from that knowledge that you've gained and they can be knowledgeable themselves, right? They can't use it if they don't know it, right? So we want to make sure that we chunk that information out for them instead of like standing up there lecturing to 5-year-olds, right? We don't want to do that. And what music teacher really wants to lecture anyway, right? I would much rather be singing, playing, and playing instruments, right? Because that's why I was a music teacher, not because I like to lecture. Even though I realize right now I'm essentially lecturing. So that's how I would answer that question. How do we implement culturally responsive teaching with our younger grades without overwhelming them in the music room? Chunk the information over time because you're utilizing unit plans, not single lesson, single class period plans. Make sure you're engaging in age appropriate words and phrases. I mean, even a 5-year-old child can understand that racism is when people are treated badly or differently because their skin is a different color, right? That's a very simple explanation. Not that that's the whole conversation. That's a very simple way that you could get that going for your students, right? So I would consider the age appropriateness of the words and the phrases, Remember your students that you're talking to in their community. So if you need to front load some information, so you don't just drop a big thing to your community without getting them ready for that, right? Because when kids go home and talk to, hey, Shalisa, when kids go home and talk to their parents, they're not going to say the lesson objective the way you wanted them to say it, right? They're going to give like the barest essence of the information, right? So if the barest essence of what they're going to say might be something that their parents might have a raised eyebrow at, you want to make sure that you're front loading that information for the adults in the community as well. And don't shy away from the bigger issues. We can help our students be the well-informed, empathetic, compassionate members of society that we need by helping them to understand these things in a safe place so that when they go out in the world, they can actually use this information, and they've gained the understanding to be able to actually discern fact from fiction when they see injustice and things like that happening. They have names for when they experience something. I know for even as an adult, I'm still learning the words and the language to describe some of the things I've experienced, right? How can we help our students at a younger age be able to put the words to some of those things to be able to better understand it? Because if they can't understand it fully or put words to it, when they go out in the world, they're not going to be able to be as well informed. That's what I would say. All right. So I know I said this was going to be a shorter one, but I guess it wasn't. I guess I had a lot to say. I'm going to hang on for just another second because I see a couple of people are watching over on Facebook, and I see some Instagram people. So if you have a question, now is the time. If you would like me to answer it live, because I'm going to be wrapping up here. And so while you are thinking of your question, I want to let you know about a couple of things coming up. So as I said before, I was a music educator teaching K-12 for 12 years, actually. And now I work full-time. I founded an education consulting company. I work full-time to support music educators in building and maintaining high-quality music programs that attract, engage, and retain their music students by centering equitable and culturally responsive practices in their curriculum and their instruction. And so I work primarily with schools and school districts and organizations. And I do also work with some one-on-one clients as well. However, I want to let you know about two things I've got going on. So the first thing is that I've been doing virtual workshops all throughout the year, except for this month. I decided to do Q&As on Tuesday. So thank you for joining me. So no workshop this month. Instead, I'm doing Q&As. And all of the Q&As I've done this month are all on all my channels. So if you want to go back and see them, you can. And I've been kind of enjoying this. So I might just keep it going. So let me know in the comments if I should keep this going in December or not. But anyway, I have recordings of the virtual workshops that I've been doing. And so I have put together a PD library for music educators, K-12 educators, because I know one difficult thing for us music educators is just having the time to be able to engage in meaningful PD. You know, some of the teachers I work with and myself when I was in the classroom, there were years where I had days, not every day, but I had days where I taught 9 classes in a row, right? So having the time to be able to get away from your students and engage in PD, I know is hard. So in my music PD library, there will be 4 workshops that I've previously recorded. The first one, there's an intro to culturally responsive music education, which just introduces my framework and my approach. There's culturally responsive music education in performance-oriented classrooms. So if you're a secondary teacher, you'll probably be interested in that one. There's one about selecting repertoire for powerful experiences. So if you're still wondering, like, how do I choose repertoire that's appropriate for my students, but still allows me to utilize culturally responsive practices, that'll be a good one to watch. And then the fourth one is 4 strategies for welcoming students into your music program. So those 4 will be in the Music PD library. The Music PD library is launching this Friday, November 25th. I'm so excited. I've been working on it for a while. And so it officially launches on Friday. And to celebrate the launch, I'm going to be holding just I guess it's a 4-day sale. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Yeah, 4 days. I'm going to let people who are on my wait list know what the special part about being on the wait list is. But being on the wait list will get you a bonus. And there's going to be a special thing that I'm going to do during those 4 days. But I'm only going to announce it to people who are on the wait list. So make sure you get on the wait list if you want to know what the special thing I'm doing during those 4 days to celebrate the launch of my on-demand PD library for K-12 music educators is going to be. You've got to be on the wait list by Thursday at whatever time I turn it off. That was about to be around this time. So because we're a one-woman show over here doing things manually. So whenever I turn it off on Thursday night, that's going to be it. And people on the wait list will get first access to the special thing that I'm going to be doing. And then everybody else, you'll still have access, but you won't get that special thing. So get on the wait list so that you can be on my email list to find out what that's going to be. And then on Monday, next Monday, the November 28th, I'm going to be doing a free mini workshop. It's going to be my last free mini workshop of the year. And this one will be on Make the Music Matter, 3 keys to designing culturally responsive music curriculum. So I'm going to focus more on curriculum design in this particular mini workshop coming up. It's completely free. If you click the link in my bio, folks on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, folks, if you go to my website, ashleycuthbertson.com, right on my homepage, there's a link for you to register for that workshop as well. It's going to be next Monday, the 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's just going to be an hour, a mini workshop. And the mini workshop is actually a preview to my masterclass that I'm doing in January. So if you're curious what it would be like to work with me a little more intimately, my next masterclass that I'm going to be doing, that's going to be the end of January 2023. And the free workshop I'm doing this coming Monday will give you a little bit of taste of what will be to come. So completely free. I record all of them. And so if you're not able to come live, make sure you at least are on the list, because I'll let the access to the replay be available. I used to do it for about 7 days. So make sure you tap into that. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a DM, or if you're on my email list, you have my email. So feel free to email me. And I hope to see many of you tapping into my Music PD library this Friday. And also, I hope to see many of you on Monday for my last mini workshop of the year. All right, I don't see any questions. Let me just make sure I didn't miss any. But I don't see any questions. And so with that, I will leave you. And again, I have been going live every Tuesday in November at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we have one more Tuesday in November. So I'll see you here on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn next Tuesday. I think that's probably the 29th. Here again, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And let me know. I haven't fully decided if I'm going to keep this going in December or not. So if you're enjoying these kind of informal, me just talking at you, I would love to talk back. So if you want to get in the conversation, let me know. But if you're enjoying this, let me know. And I'll decide if I want to keep it going in December or what I'm going to do. So I hope to see you on Monday. Link in bio, Instagram friends. Head to my website, ashleycuthbertson.com, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook friends. Make sure you register for my last free workshop of the year that's coming up on Monday. And have a wonderful week. I know for a lot of music educators, this is the holiday week. So enjoy your holiday week. And I hope to see you again next Tuesday. All right. Bye, everyone.